Chapter 18 Departed. Hiccup waited for Domokos to reach the shore, his chest tight. The distant sound of masculine shouts and even fainter clangs of butting weapons colored the background, adding to the tension coursing through his body. He had to wonder at the speed of a night fury, something he thought entirely natural, compared to that of a horse, given that he had been to the island and back already. Many women, as well as the youngest of the clan, hidden in the bunker, witnessed his hasty packing. He had given them a broken message explaining his departure, involving rushed English and a few Hungarian words he picked up. They understood. Some bowed to him in Eastern custom, some shook his hand in Western, a few gave him short hugs and back pats. Neither Katul nor Tunde were present, which led Hiccup to believe they were on the mainland, either fetching their horses or opting to hide in another camp. Katul would never get her chance to ride Toothless. Not in this visit, anyway. Hiccup entertained the thought of returning some day to help him deal with the reality of not saying goodbye to everyone. "Ixty!" The shout was accompanied by the rapid clumps of a gallop. Domokos vaulted from the saddle before the horse even came to a full stop. In any other circumstance, Hiccup would have laughed at the similar maneuver he often pulled himself. The Magyar steed, Halap, pawed at the ground in nervous agitation, shinnying away from Toothless out of instinct, but otherwise remaining loyally by its master's side. "Domokos!" Hiccup gasped. Just knowing that a battle thrashed against the outskirts of the camp left him breathless. Without another word, Hiccup thrust the horn at the man, the horn that started this all. Domokos didn't take it right away, instead staring at its sudden appearance as though it were a hallucination expected to disappear at a moment's notice. "A promise is a promise." Hiccup smiled despite everything. His voice seemed to prod Domokos from his trance, and the man gingerly took the horn. Rough hands ran along the smoothed icons, worshipful and caring. Domokos drew a breath, somehow sounding rejuvenated, and tied the leather strap of the horn to a loop on his belt. "Give me your map," Domokos ordered. Hiccup hopped to the task without delay, and soon had the worn parchment unrolled at his feet. Domokos bent to observe it, bringing a finger to an area on the map Hiccup had circled several times. "You plan to go to this, Miklagard, yes?" At Hiccup's affirmative nod, he moved his finger to a point on a blue line Hiccup knew represented the Duna. "Follow the Duna south to the river, Morva." The finger transferred to a different blue line. "Follow it until you see Stara Planina, a sea-old mountain. There is a small river that cuts between them." He tapped at the thin blue crease, splitting the wide line illustrating mountains. "When you reach it, follow it south to the Maritsa River. It flows eastward. Follow it until it splits, and then continue eastward along land. You should reach the walls of Miklagard. Keep the water in sight." Domokos stood, a silent indication that he delivered all the instruction necessary, and Hiccup rolled up the map as fast as he had laid it. He felt immensely grateful Domokos had the forethought to actually show him on the map rather than only speak it. Visual stimulation he could recall, but verbal often went in one ear and out the other. "Thank you," he said sincerely as he packed the map securely in his rucksack. "So I assume I will be practicing night archery on my own?" Domokos smiled, as though the war were the farthest thing from his mind at the moment. "You can do it," he assured Hiccup. "You have covered remarkable ground in your time with us. As long as you are driven, I have faith you will continue to flourish. You will have to set your own pace, but it is good fortune that you have someone to help you stay the course." He nodded to Toothless, who seemed pleased at being addressed with such warm and familiar tones. Hiccup knew the dragon liked anyone who trusted him, though he didn't think Toothless's opinion on blindfolded flying changed since he last expressed it. Hiccup held out a hand. "Well, this is it." Domokos gripped Hiccup's forearm firmly. "May the gods smile favorably upon your journey." He bit with his own customary smile. Hiccup returned the gesture, released the arm, and leapt onto the saddle with agility. His feet were in the stirrups, and his harness clipped within 2 blinks. "Oh, Ixty!" Hiccup glanced up in time to catch the weapon thrown at his face. Domokos laughed at the boy's panicked fumbling to avoid dropping the bow. "It is a practice bow," Domokos explained in Hiccup's bewildered expression. "You will need to find a better one eventually, one that is compatible with you. But it will do for now. Here." Hiccup had more success catching a few arrows bundled together now that he had his attention on Domokos. "That should last you for a little while. I trust you know how to craft your own arrows by now." Hiccup blinked out his dumbfounded state.
"Oh, yes."
The Nia clan taught him much about their methods, from the base of their bows to the best feathers to use for arrow fletching. Even some of their battle tactics were shared. A particularly loud cry broke from the hum of battle that had somehow turned to background noise during his interactions with Domokos. Hiccup bit his lip.
"You will be okay?"
he asked. He needed to be sure. If they truly needed his help, he would stay. They were far too kind for him not to. Domokos waved off his worry. "Go. This is not your war. I would not want you to be dragged into it. One not of Magyar descent has no place there." Hiccup slipped the bow over his torso so that the string pressed diagonally across his chest and the grip to his back. He would have to unstring it when he found a safer place to land. Hiccup took a quick mental inventory, recounting his valuables minus the horn. Toothless was saddled with quite a few more possessions than when they arrived, most of which were thrown at him by Katul and her mother. Clothing, food, even some remedial herbs. Though ones like dried opium poppy he had no idea what to use for. Satisfied, he gave his teacher a final smile.
"Domokos Kustanum for everything."
The older man held a hand to his heart and gave a slight bow. "It was my pleasure. I feel that having any impact on a life such as yours will only enrich my own." Hiccup paused halfway in his takeoff crouch, amused by the statement. Domokos spoke before Hiccup could make a smart aleck comment regarding his own importance. "I am a diviner, as you say, for my people. The signs spoke of it as my birth many, many cold seasons ago." The suddenness of the statement, what it implied, chased the mirth from Hiccup's face. Seeing the bug-eyed expression, Domokos had the gall to grin as he said, "I know you have been touched by the gods, Hixti Hilderi, by whatever form they may have chosen. I am not so generous to everyone, you know." Hiccup made a very conscious effort not to fall off his dragon, going so far as to grip the front of the saddle. He felt as though he had been physically struck, the air left his lungs, and a momentary numbness befell him as his brain tried to make sense of what Domokos had said. A diviner. Domokos had the powers of an elder, a gifted elder, and he had known more about Hiccup than he let on. But more than Domokos' status, which Hiccup should have figured considering the man's seeming omniscience, and more than implying his own celestial contact, which Hiccup still had trouble believing in, one thing stood out above all.
"I'm gonna—"
He paused, swallowing.
"How did you know I was a haddock?"
Instead of verbally replying, Domokos smiled, that infuriating smile, and mounted Chalap. The horse snorted at its rider's sudden weight, but otherwise did nothing but turn his dark eye onto the strange human-dragon duo. For some inane reason, Hiccup suddenly noticed several similarities between Domokos and Chalap that he hadn't noticed before. Their eye color, their hair color, even the skin and hide of man and beast seemed to match, like they were destined. "We will see each other again, my friend," Domokos stated, and Hiccup found himself knowing this to be true, even without the new awareness of the Magyar's seer-like abilities. Hiccup also knew he wouldn't get a straight answer out of the man, not if he were anything like Gudrid. Not today, anyway. One day he would force a clear truth from him without the riddles and innuendos. One day, hopefully, he would understand his own destiny as much as individuals like Gudrid and Domokos seemed to. Hiccup sighed, and with a shake of his head and a rueful smile, accepted this upended departure. "Ready?" Toothless asked. The dragon could feel Hiccup's weight shift in anticipation of takeoff. Hiccup responded with a hand rested on his neck, and they launched into the sky, taking off at a speed no Magyar could hope to match on horseback. Hiccup didn't look back, but he knew Domokos would watch him until distance made him indiscernible. "Are you okay?" Toothless had to ask. Hiccup had been far too quiet for the amount of unrest radiating off him.
"What? Yeah, I'm fine. I mean, I'm a little freaked out by how much Domokos knows about, well, everything. Not that I know exactly what he knows, but I know he knows more in an otherworldly sense. I swear, he and Gudrid have been having secret dream meetings behind my back or something."
"You know, all we have to do is deviate a little to the left and we'll be close enough."
No.
Hiccup cut him off.
I shouldn't get involved. Domokos didn't want me to, anyway.
You're curious, Toothless continued to push. And you feel bad. I can hear it in your heartbeat. Hiccup chose to ignore the heartbeat comment. Toothless had perception to envy.
I'm not a Magyar. I don't know enough about any of this to butt in. I really have no business.
They were already banking towards the gaggle of war cries. Hiccup hadn't even noticed his foot switch positions until the increase in volume caught his attention. He just wanted to see, to make sure the Nyack would be okay, to make sure they weren't outnumbered or desperately in need of the help of an inexperienced archer flying around on a dragon. That was how he tried to justify his direct disobedience of Domokos, anyway. The first thing Hiccup noticed, even before the gore or broken bodies, was a mass of color. Apparently, Hungarians in general wanted to be seen, and it wasn't just the Nyack who brightly dyed their clothing. Hiccup recognized some of them, which helped to identify who their enemies were by process of elimination. Many fought on foot, using their sabers, some fired from the steeds, others managed a combination of sword fighting while mounted. Toothless slowed their speed, giving Hiccup more time to observe the calamity. It only served to enhance the need to help in some way.
We might as well contribute where we can,
Hiccup offered haltingly. Now that he'd seen it, he couldn't turn away, not without doing something. He'd feel like he was running away, like he ran away from the last war. Toothless felt as dubious as Hiccup sounded. He knew they agreed it would be best not to get too close to another culture's problems, but somehow Hiccup's resolve to carry on their way waned the closer they got to truly leaving. I thought you did not want to involve yourself in their war? Not that he could really complain. He was always game for a good fight.
I don't, but they're sold.
Hiccup didn't know how or why his eye was drawn to the young man, but the Magyar managed to stand out amongst the action. Solt, on foot, battled with her saber, dominating his opponent just as effectively as it defeated Hiccup in every spar. Hey,
I see it.
A man not of the clan had just finished off a member of the Nyack, a member Hiccup recalled sharing meals with, and now furtively crept towards Solt's back with a poised sword as the other engaged in combat. Hiccup's foot tweaked the fin, and they pitched sideways into a drop. The bow was slipped off his shoulder, and one of the satcheled arrows found its way into the nook. Hiccup could only focus on the soon-to-be backstabber and how dishonorable it was, and how, despite Salt being an ass to him, he didn't deserve such a cheap death. With indignation tunneling his vision, Hiccup's thumb released at just the right moment in their swoop, and the arrow plunged into its target. Not only did the arrow strike the man in the shoulder, but also the force at which it hit, the combined power of bow tension and his beating dragon, physically lifted the man and threw him backwards. Hiccup had no doubt in his mind that it pierced straight through the chainmail, if that was even worn, something he otherwise would have been unable to do on foot. Yes, Toothless cheered. This mounted archery business had taken a turn for the better in his opinion.
Wow,
Hiccup breathed.
I did it.
And it wasn't a tree. It was a person. He turned in his seat as they rose, wanting to get a reassuring intake that it had actually happened. He had done that. He had taken someone down so hard that they were thrown. Never in his life did he think he were capable.
Oi, thank you, Ixty.
Absolute shock dazed Hiccup for the second time within a minute, as the grateful voice belonged to none other than Salt, who may not have seen what happened, but certainly put the pieces together fast enough. Not one for ignoring gratitude, Hiccup managed to compose himself in time to salute the young man back before Salt was absorbed in a new combat. My turn now? Is it my turn?
Your turn? What?
Hiccup looked down at Toothless, who had a split tongue hanging from the side of his mouth like an excited dog. Come on, let's show them what the dragon can do. Enough of these flying sticks. It was the fact that Toothless sounded so wound up at the prospect of shooting firebolts at people that had Hiccup almost instantly agreeing.
It has been a long time since you've gotten to shoot fire at anyone,
Hiccup murmured by way of consent. They were already heading towards the source of the battle, to where the waves of enemies emerged. The line of attackers soon became visible. Hiccup could see a clear gap between the Nyack and the enemy.
All right,
he whispered against the wind as he and Toothless transformed into a missile of firepower and intelligence, descending from the sky like a harbinger of death. Toothless did the honors of announcing their presence with a roar, a tactic to instill fear in the offense. The result was instantaneous. All eyes were on them. Horses of the Niecks' enemies were already rearing back in alarm at the dark and dangerous mass, the men atop screaming and pointing their weapons, but no one fired, uncertainty and fear staying their weapons for that single instant Hiccup and Toothless needed to get close enough. Toothless opened his jaws, the glow within the maw their only warning, before 3 bolts struck the ground in front of the advancing crew. Men were thrown from their mounts, the screaming intensified, and several turned tail and ran at the growing flames catching into the foliage. With much of their path blocked by a blaze, many of those still in control were forced to stop. The next step took some fancy footwork on Hiccup's part as the primed arrows were finally released. The boy spun and weaved, rising quickly to diminish the risk and returning back on track. Nothing struck, of course. Hiccup could have sworn Toothless responded to his silent commands better and vice versa. Proficiency most likely related to the lack of archery going on at his end. Hiccup's guilt in leaving at such a time released from his chest. He had done his part, even though Domokos had asked him not to. At least now the Niecks' enemies would be less inclined to continue to advance. If they weren't terrified enough, the possibility that there were more dragons ahead would surely make them think twice before attacking again.
"I feel good,"
he announced to his partner. The Duna reappeared, the course set before them, and the summer winds felt fantastic. The shouts of battle were mostly transformed to terror born from their efforts, which Hiccup didn't mind listening to at all. It's not like anyone really got hurt. Well, except for that one guy. But he had it coming, trying to sneak up from behind.
"Speaking of which, did you see? Soul seemed happy to see me,"
Hiccup stated brightly.
"I mean, yeah, it was at the end and everything, but at least I got him to smile at me once, and not in a mean way."
"He was probably happy that you were leaving."
"He thanked me,"
Hiccup sniffed. "Yeah, thanked you for leaving his sister's virtue intact." Hiccup reared back, cringing.
"What? That wasn't... I didn't even... You always do this. You don't even know what that means."
"That's important to humans, is it not?" Toothless inquired innocently enough. "It seems there's a lot of importance placed on untouched women." Getting his blubbering under control, Hiccup tried to make himself respond seriously. Toothless was naturally curious about these things. He didn't know how sobering and awkward they were for Hiccup to talk about. It wasn't like living in the wilderness was giving him any comprehension on the fairer sex.
"Humans tend to choose one, mate for their life, so they like them in a pure state. Well, that sounded bad, but they prefer wives who have never been touched before."
Was he really trying to explain human courtship to his best friend, who wasn't even a human? Toothless snorted. "That is just ridiculous to me. If she can breed well enough, then it shouldn't matter who's had her before." Hiccup dropped his face into his hands. How did this always happen? Just moments ago he was shooting Hungarians with arrows, feeling confident and manly, and now...
"Humans aren't dragons, okay? They like one partner in their life, and they want them in a good condition."
What was he saying? It sounded terrible.
It's a cultural thing."
"It's an impractical culture," Toothless intoned, impervious to Hiccup's embarrassment. "Won't you do the same thing one day? Choose one female?"
I'm not inclined to,"
Hiccup answered honestly. Though that had more to do with the connotation that marriage would mean less mobility and freedom, 2 things that he could honestly say were his, and he had no intention of giving them up any time soon. Besides, people married for monetary purposes, to create alliances, and he was content with proving he could manage both on his own. With Toothless's help, that is. He didn't need to join a family for a stable life, and he certainly wouldn't tie himself to a woman to grant her one. Marriage was also to keep up socially acceptable appearances. He already blew that to hell. "Good, because I'm not carrying your female. I don't care how pure she is." Hiccup couldn't take it anymore.
"Okay, this conversation needs to stop now."
"Is embarrassment regarding mating habits another cultural thing? Why couldn't Toothless just let him have his manly moment?"
"That is not stopping."
"By Tiamat's udder."
"Hey, that time we avoided all the rocks."
The contrast in tones proved just how far each male's mindset lay. Toothless was ready to ground himself for the rest of the day. Hiccup found optimism in each near miss. "We need to stop. Now," Toothless demanded. He couldn't take much more of this. "I want food."
"Just one more time,"
his rider pleaded. It was easy for him to feel excited. He was blindfolded. He didn't have to witness each terrifying close call. "No," the dragon deadpanned.
Fine."
They landed at their campsite on the shores of the Morva. It was a short trip, being so close to the ground to begin with. Hiccup flew off the saddle with a bounce in his step, ripping the tied cloth from his head. Toothless was decidedly less bouncy as he collapsed on the ground, and in no way helpful with the removal of his saddle. He didn't know where Hiccup got all this enthusiasm, though he recalled seeing it often when the boy was trying to figure out how to get him back in the air. No amount of failure would deter him. Only this time, it wasn't a mechanical problem that needed to be fixed. They simply needed to practice, which required Toothless to participate more in the painful game of trial and error as well.
"I thought you were hungry,"
Hiccup asked the lazing dragon. He had finally managed to get the blasted saddle from the unhelpful reptile. "Can you get it?" Toothless groaned, rolling to his side. "I'm more tired than hungry." Hiccup pursed his lips, but allowed the dragon the request.
"Okay, but you better be prepared to do twice as much practice as today, since we're quitting early. We've almost got this."
"No." It came out as a pained moan. It stirred no sympathy from the rogue Viking.
"Yes,"
Hiccup finalized in the same short tone Toothless used on him earlier. He turned around and armed himself with a dagger. His already strung bow was strapped around his bare chest. A couple of arrows were tucked into his belt. The bow and arrow were really just a reserve option. He used his arrows sparingly, focusing his attentions on blindfolded flying rather than extending his arrow supply. Over the last month, he slowly collected reeds, decent-sized rocks, and saved the occasional bone from their game with the intention of forging some ammo, but he had not the tools to pull it off. A problem he refused to worry about at the moment, especially with the improvement of his and Toothless's performance. Toothless watched as the human collected his weapons, content to lie boneless in the grass. The boy was often without his shirt as they endured the sweltering heat of Tfumalnadur, as Hiccup called it, though he admitted his uncertainty if that was the exact month. It wasn't the greatest idea when one planned on crashing, but Hiccup claimed he couldn't stand the magnitude of the temperature they experienced and would not bear unnecessary layers. Toothless had to agree. He was starting to shed scales prematurely. Unfortunately, that left the stretched figure of corded muscle and bone littered with scrapes and bruises that took forever to heal in the dragon's opinion. The lingering of each blemish annoyed Toothless to no end, taunting him for his inability to protect his only charge. Toothless's part of the new training regimen involved being the eyes of the pair and communicating the surroundings as it would play out in the night when Hiccup needed to focus on the target. Hiccup's part was to listen, react accordingly, and trust Toothless to relay accurate information. Hiccup had no problem with trusting, though some problem with the listening, and each crash or mishap had Toothless feeling partially responsible. Hiccup never complained much, but Toothless knew he couldn't be comfortable in such a raw state. One time Hiccup hurt his arm so badly in a crash that they were forced to take it easy for over a week. Hiccup insisted it wasn't broken, and Toothless, with little to no knowledge on human health, had no choice but to take his word for it. A new and unexpected presence startled him from his rest. "Hiccup?" It was stupid for him to call out to Hiccup. The boy had left at some point while he dozed. And this wasn't Hiccup's scent. This wasn't Hiccup's weight moving along the ground. Hiccup did not have a drooling set of tail-long saber fangs. Though Toothless would forever maintain that Hiccup's teeth scared him far more than the ones bared at him now.